Hi, and welcome back to Continual Fandom. Tonight, it is time to jump into our DeLoreans and hop through time. We're going to be talking about all about the Back to the Future franchise. And here to dive into the fandom with me is a bunch of authors that all chose poorly and decided that we too needed to go dive through time. So, Barbara, would you like to let everybody know who you are?
Well, sure. I'm Barbara Evers. I am an author, epic fantasy author with a trilogy out, the Watchers of Manaya trilogy. I also have a short story collection out and lots of past short stories and essays that have been published over the years.
Amy?
I am Amy. I write under A.L. Kaplan. I have, behind me, a few books and short stories out. Usually, YA, fantasy, and science fiction.
Joshua.
My name's Joshua Palmatier. I write epic dark fantasy. I've been published with DAW. I have 9 books out at the moment. The most recent trilogy starts with Shattering the Lay, which is being whited out there, but and that trilogy is complete, and hopefully I'll have a new trilogy out later this year. We'll see. I am also the founder of the small press, Zombies Need Brains. We do themed anthologies that we fund with Kickstarters. Every summer, we've got 4 new ones coming out this summer that I'm working on right at the moment. And I also started an online magazine being run through Patreon that's called ZNB Presents. And we're just now coming up on the end of the first year of that. So check all of that stuff out.
And Ian.
I'm Randal Strock. I think of myself as a science fiction writer, though 98% of my published words have been nonfiction, mostly presidential history. My fiction usually appears in Analog, Nature, a bunch of anthologies. And beyond being a writer, I'm also the editor and publisher and owner and chief fool at Fantastic Books. Come find us on the web at fantasticbooks.biz. Upcoming, we've got Jewish Futures, a nifty anthology of future stories of Judaism. Should be out this July, August.
So I'm going to start with the fun and easy question here. What was your first introduction? Because all of us are about that right age. Barbara, what was your first introduction to getting to see Back to the Future?
I was in college, and before you get excited about that, I had a few years of adult life. Then I went to college, but I was in college, and my boyfriend and I were looking for something to do that night, and we went to see Back to the Future, and I was hooked. It was a lot of fun.
Amy?
Let's see. 1985. That would be in college. I don't remember when I saw it or who I saw it with, just that was when I was in college.
That was the 80s.
Yeah.
So Josh.
Shockingly, I was 13.
Oh, I feel old now.
Yeah.
It makes you guys feel better. I thought I was one of the older ones in the crowd, so take that as a compliment. But yes, I was 13, and it was the 80s, the decade of good movies, and of course this was a Spielberg one, and the family all got together and went to the theater to see it, and was of course subsequently blown away by it. So yes.
Ian.
Outing.
I think I read Time Enough for Love in the early 1980s. And then when I saw this movie and said, gee, gosh, I guess they read Heinlein too.
So, again, if we go back to the original film, and I mean, because that was one of those that I know it took a lot to get made produced. There's been a lot of discussion over the years of the fact that it really was kind of a little wholesome for the movies of the 80s and the time. It wasn't just quite on the edgy side of enough. But it was one of those things. It was sort of one of the magic films of the period of time. So, Amy, when you first got to go see it, what are the first real memories, the themes, the things that you really kind of remember about it, and what still holds your interest in the original film today?
Well, being as I just rewatched it, I can tell you, I think it still holds. The all of it. I mean, it did not feel dated. Well, yeah, it's some of the lingo from the 80s, but that was the whole charm of it, is the going back in time and meeting your parents, and they're not always what you thought they were.
Or what they make themselves out to be.
Yeah. That he had some eye openers, and those little things that can make the difference in self-esteem, which carried over to all of them, the whole family.
Yeah.
But I did my favorite scene, though, or is that another question?
Oh no, go for it.
My favorite scene is when he puts the little earbuds on his dad and convinces him to Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan, and he's gotta go ask. Yeah, I love that scene.
Joshua, how about you?
I think the thing that blew my mind the most was about the movie. I mean, the whole movie just blew your mind, or at least it did at that time. But I think the thing that really, really stuck with me was how they had so many hidden little connections between everything. I mean, absolutely everything. And if you're not paying attention, you miss half of the connections. Things like the movie starts out and they're at Twin Pines Mall. And then when they go, after he runs over the tree in the past, it becomes the Lone Pine Mall. And, all the little things, even things like, they throw the cake down at the beginning, and his uncle was supposed to be getting out of prison, and that, got squashed or whatever. And then when he meets his uncle in the past, he's in the crib, and all that kind of stuff, like he's in jail already and everything. And it just really, really blew my mind, all of the itty bitty little things that they don't really draw your attention to it. They're just there. And if you're not paying attention, you miss it. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's so fun to watch over and over and over again, is because you didn't catch everything that first time through, and it takes a couple viewings before you really start picking up on all of the different things that they manage to connect up between the past and the present, 85 and everything. And in terms of what my favorite scene is, I mean, the whole movie is basically one giant favorite scene, to be honest. But but if I had to pick something, I have to say that just the whole end sequence with the lightning and everything, and how everything keeps going wrong. Even when you think he's finally got it hooked up to the clock or whatever, when he pulls on it, it unplugs from the lamppost. It was just horrible thing after horrible thing after horrible thing happening, and you're like, when is something going to go right? And then, of course, the whole thing is that if all of those things hadn't happened, then he wouldn't have had the lightning bolt hit the car at the appropriate time, right? If everything had gone correct, then they would have missed it. So all of that needed to happen in order for the events to unfold well. And I mean, it's just a constant movie. Like the minute I could be scrolling through, we don't really do that anymore with streaming, but it used to be you'd scroll through the channels, and if you hit on this, and it was no matter where it was in the movie, I'd be stuck. I'd hit it, I'd be like, oh crap, this is Back to the Future, and then I'm stuck there. I'm gonna watch it from whatever that point is all the way to the end. And it's just, I don't know, it's just an amazing, not just the first movie, just the whole series, I think, is amazing.
Ian?
Well, I still flip the channels on TV, Joshua, and I still do that. But all of those little things you're mentioning, that was what really grabbed me, was that by the time I'd seen this, I was already enough into science fiction and time travel. I love time travel. And this was perhaps the first movie that really did it well and paid attention to it, so that changes actually did propagate through the timeline. As he said, Twin Pines Mall became a Lone Pine Mall. And you don't draw attention to it because it just is the world that has been modified. And they were so good in making the movie to pay attention to all of those things, except for the one thing where Marty's siblings are fading from the picture ever so slowly. It was just, okay, they needed that for movie making. I get that. He shouldn't have just disappeared. But everything else, it was like, wow, they got the details. They did it. They did it right. Yeah, it's a fun movie, but they treated it properly. They treated time travel as if it were legitimate. And then they worked with, okay, so what happens then? What happens next? And unto the DeLorean itself, I mean, you're showing us the version from the beginning of the second movie, and you can tell because they made the little changes, and each time they had to change it to modify something, it stayed with the car. First it was the lightning rod, and then it was Mr. Fusion, and then towards the end of the third movie, he had to build the massive the macro circuit as opposed to the micro circuit on the hood of the car. But it all worked, and it even to the tires changing in the 50s. It's just, yeah. I mean, it was obviously they got some things wrong. I'm still waiting for Jaws 19, but they got the Cubbies winning the World Series. They were off by 1 year, so you got to give them some props there. Although the hover conversion, I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah.
Well, part of me is waiting for that. The other part of me says people can't drive in 2 dimensions. I don't want them to have 3.
That would be scary.
It would.
Barbara, how about you?
I love that first movie so much. And I've been sitting here trying to think, what are my favorite scenes and what grabbed me? And, Josh already mentioned about the uncle who was in prison. And, I love the line, "You better get used to these bars." And he says to him, he's in the playpen. When he first meets, Doc Brown, and he's trying to guess what he's there for. And when he yanks that suction thing off of his forehead, and he says, "I came here from the future in a car you created, or a time machine you created," and the whole flux capacitor conversation comes forward. And it's hard for me to pick one scene because there's so many great scenes in this movie. And to try to nail one, every one of the ones y'all have mentioned are powerful scenes for me. And I was trying to think, one we haven't talked about is when he first arrives and he's walking through downtown in the 1950s, and Mr. Sandman's playing perfect background music at that point, because it's almost dreamlike for him. The guys come out and they're servicing the car at the gas station, and the clock is working, and just so many different things. And he goes and he orders, what was it, a Pepsi free or whatever the drinks were at the time, which of course that's one of the things that's very dated, but it's still hilarious to those of us who remember those days and those particular drinks. And I know we'll talk about the other movies, but I love how some of these themes carry through each movie too. So there's I could go on, and I would probably list almost every scene in the movie as my favorites.
I do have a great affinity for the Chuck Berry scene, which is the Chuck, you gotta hear this.
Yes.
Your cousin Marvin.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that it's just, and I also think that's part of what's lacking in the movies today, is that the whole movie was just totally creative. Like they like Ian said, they came up with this idea and they totally went with it, and it was like unlike anything that anybody had ever seen at that point. And I think that describes basically everything that came out in the 80s, is that they just went for it. It didn't matter if nobody had ever seen it or if somebody thought it was a stupid idea. They just went for it, and they actually pulled it off most of the time. And that's why we love all of the different scenes, and we can't pick one that's a favorite, is because every single scene, they just maxed out the creativity for that scene. I did want to point out one thing. I actually read the book, the novelization of the movie. and or of the script anyway. And I want to point out that there were even more things in the book that were like coincidental things. Like there was this whole detention scene, and it set up this thing over here, and that, you know, it never made it into the movie. But it was like when I read the book, I was like, there's even more things.
Oh, that's right. Huey Lewis even in the movie.
Yep.
Sorry, fellas, you're just too darn loud.
Yeah.
So let's actually jump to the second movie and talk about that a little bit, because that was, of course, leaping into the future, right?
Mhm.
I'm still waiting on my hoverboard. You know, I'm 100% certain that had we gotten them, I would have killed myself on one, because I can't skateboard to start with, but I've at least given it a try and killed myself in some embarrassing way. But what did you think about from the time period of that looks so far in the future, which is now in our past?
Isn't that depressing? The
Yeah.
future Marty leapt into was 7.5 years ago.
Yeah. So, Josh, I'll almost stick you with that one to start with.
Well, I think it's funny now that I have friends that said that have kids and stuff, and then they make their kids watch it and whatever. And they, you know, the comment that kids make is that, well, they just went to 2015. That was like you said, 7.5 years ago. That's not the future. They're like, why? How can they say they're going into the future? And you know, of course, you have to give the kids context and stuff. But you know, that's something else. But I mean, I know for the second movie, I know they leapt into the future. I think for the time that they did a very good job of imagining what the future in 2015 would be without going overboard. Like that, you know, everything they imagined, I felt was more or less reasonable. You know, and you know, you compare it to like the 1950s sci-fi novels where at this point in time we were supposed to have explored the entire universe, not just our solar system or our galaxy, but we were supposed to be out in the entire universe at this point in time. So for what they did, I thought it was very, very reasonable. Of course, they didn't get everything right. Nobody ever does. But I thought everything was completely and utterly believable for, you know, a 30-year jump into the future, in my opinion.
Ian?
Well, the problem with fusion power is it's always 10 years in the future, and it's been 10 years in the future for 30 or 40 or 50 years now. Unfortunately, I think that was the problem with predicting what 2015 would look like. There are so many things in there that seem legitimate, and yet they're still so far away. On the other hand, yeah, you know, it was a product of the mid-1980s, and boy, is it dated now. But so what? I love it. It's alternate history now. Mm-hmm. And heck, they even traveled alternate history and even kind of sort of explained how they got there. Except that how they got the time machine in order to travel back to the alternate 1985 after Biff had taken it and screwed up the timeline, I'm still not sure on that one part.
That's the problem with time travel movies. Is there's always something.
Mm-hmm.
But they did find the 1990s fashion. So,
well, I'm sorry. And Cafe 80s was wonderful because, of course, nobody except those of us who were alive at the time know who those two people on the TV screens are.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Forgot about them.
Barbara, how about you?
Yeah, I was trying to remember the Cafe 80s scene. Who was on the screen?
It was the Ronald Reagan. They were both Max Headroomized. Ronald Reagan arguing with the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I forgot about that. You know, it was kind of interesting to watch that downtown scene because, of course, they're trying to emulate the downtown scene when he went it back into the 50s, and they do that then in 2015, fictitious 2015. And it was kind of fun to look at these things. Hoverboards, you know, we technically have them, but they don't hover. But they call things hoverboards because we desperately, I mean, I'm sure the people who are developing these toys now are people who grew up watching those movies and they want the hoverboard. So they say we've got the hoverboard. We just don't really have the hoverboard. I'm almost convinced the tennis shoes with the rollers in them are, an offshoot of the hoverboards because, kids, the people who are developing them are people who watch these movies. What I'm waiting for is, the pizza that I forget what they called it, where they
hydrate machine. Hydrating
I was going to say hydrate, but I wasn't sure if that was the word.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like 10 seconds and you got a pizza. And what cracks me up is no one can do it like your mom. And I'm thinking, what did she do? But I'll be honest, I like this movie the least of the three of them.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, it's the darkest movie, but I felt like their imagination worked. I mean, let's face it, the Jetsons was, I forget what year it was projected for, but George Jetson should be alive by now. There was a whole meme went around Facebook sometime last year. George Jetson is now alive. So a lot of the things that get predicted in the past, they're just not going to come to fruition in the time frame that we thought, as we know. And it still makes it fun. And when you watch it with your kids, it makes it more fun because the kids are like, what? No, we don't have
that.
But we have other things.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
With CD players now, and now we have the magical things
that have everything on them. They
have everything. Yes, there's your cassette player and your DVD player, your portable movie machine, and your phone.
Nobody actually uses it as a phone.
I actually do, surprisingly. Not as often, but it's helped me keep in touch with my kids. The main reason we got them. Second movie, I have to say that's probably my least favorite too. I think they did a decent job, but predicting the future is always hard. I want that rehydrator thing. I wish we had that. And of course I grew up when microwaves first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was this wonderful magical thing. So it's got to be soon. We're getting there. We've got to be getting there. I did have one plot point that bothered me in that movie, and that was Marty being so sensitive to being called chicken. That was not anywhere in the first one, but all of a sudden it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I didn't get that. That I didn't get at all.
Well, I don't think when they made the first one that they really expected there to be a second one.
Right.
Necessarily. Because like you said, it was a little bit risky at the time. So they probably thought it was going to be a one-off in the first place. But yeah, there was a little bit of a slight change in that respect in Marty's character from the first one to the second one.
Well, and in Jennifer too, but
yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, Jennifer was more than
just character.
Was literally a character change. One of the things about the second movie, I think that came up at the time was that it didn't do as well because it was too confusing. Audiences thought it was too confusing because, they jumping in the future and then they're going back to 85 and then they're going, they were jumping around too much in a lot
alternate universe 85. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the viewers said at the time that it was too confusing. And that's one of the reasons they didn't like it. But I looked at, of course, by this point, I was already thinking in terms of being a writer. And I looked at it and I said, well, they couldn't really do it any other way. They minimized the jumps for the plot. They really minimized the jumps. That it was the minimum number of jumps necessary to pull off that story. And so I always had an issue with that. And then that people thought the jumping was confusing. I never thought so. The thing I had an issue with is I really didn't think they pulled off Michael J. Fox as like 5 different characters or whatever, however many he was for the future. Because there were a couple of them where I was just like, that's clearly Michael J. Fox with long hair. I mean, it's like, There's just no way. It's just him. They didn't do anything to really hide it.
They weren't trying to. That was supposed to be a joke. That was the lightheartedness, because it was an otherwise a very dark movie, which suffered from the fact that it was the middle installment in a trilogy.
Yeah.
And just as with books, when an author writes a great standalone and then the publisher says, okay, make it a trilogy, the second one always suffers, because the first one has a legitimate ending point, but the second one doesn't. It's a cliffhanger because they're writing to get to the third. Yeah. And I mean, they even told us with these two, they filmed 2 and 3 as one big movie.
Yeah.
Well, and do you think that also the fact that one was so hooked on nostalgia, the idealized 50s was also part of the hook, that Jump to the Future, you couldn't necessarily have that in the same way either.
Yeah, the only way they really hit the nostalgia part was to do the 80s cafe, which really wasn't nostalgia, but it at least gave us something that we related to in the movies.
Yeah. And we have to remember, I mean, it technically didn't come out in 85, so they knew everything that had happened in 85 by that point. So
well, and the Cafe 80s also let us laugh at the concept of nostalgia, because we looked at it and realized, okay, this is what the future is going to think of us today. So, gosh, I guess what we're thinking about the 1950s really is kind of absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did like that all 3 movies had that had the fertilizer in some shape or form. That tied in very nicely.
Yes, it did.
So, Ian, I'm going to start you off on movie number 3, where we leap further back into the future and, try to hold up a train or something. But, what about you for the third film, trying to go and wrap up the trilogy and tighten it up?
Well, see, the third film, like the first, is much more of a self-contained movie.
Yeah.
Whereas the second is only a bridge from the first to the third, and that was the problem with it. The third is nice because it plays on the fact that, okay, actually, this is a panel I'm going to be doing this weekend at Heliosphere, quite similar to it. I've got a time machine. That's great. I'm in the 1880s. We got to get gas. Okay, we're screwed because there's no gas stations here. But what does Doc do? Well, Doc finds himself in the 1880s. Doc is a brilliant scientist, so he builds this massive, noisy, huge, clanking machine to generate ice cubes. That's Doc. I love Doc there. That's brilliant.
Yep. Yes.
Barbara?
I've always been a fan of the Old West, so actually, this is my favorite of the 3 movies. I was so excited when I found out they were going to make that movie, because I just couldn't wait to see how they depicted everything. And there's so much that they tie together from the first to the second to the third movie, including, the what do they call it? The Gulch or whatever, where the teacher...
Shonash Ravine or Clayton Ravine?
The ravine, which becomes, Eastwood Ravine. And, the fact that he thinks Clint Eastwood is this really, really cool name. And they're like, huh? What kind of name is that? And I think my favorite scene is when Doc is in the bar, just totally upset over losing what was it? Clara. Yes, Clara. And, you think he's totally bombed and he's not even drunk anything yet, but all the things he's saying and these guys just laughing their heads off. And you've got people in that scene who've been in a lot of movies we grew up watching. So it was kind of fun to watch them, interact with this particular story. And then, he finally takes that one drink and then we get the wake up juice, and there's just so much. And I guess it's his great grandfather. I forget how many greats the guy is. It's supposed to be his grandfather. And the fact that his great grandmother or whatever number of greats it is, doesn't really trust him and doesn't really like him. And, the pie plates, oh, cool, Frisbee. And they're like, huh? There's just so many. I mean, there's just a lot of, like Joshua said earlier, There are a lot of little details that are just fun, and just all the different things that carry through. The sheriff is the guy who is the principal. It's just priceless. And taking a train and turning it into the time machine, and then of course seeing the ultimate time machine at the very end of that movie is so much fun, because I grew up with a dad who was very much into trains. So I was dragged anywhere a steam engine showed up. So getting this train as the final time machine just was a perfect cap on the whole thing for me.
Amy?
Well, I do like the movie. I don't remember all the details because it's been a while since I saw that one. But there was one scene in there that when he gets to his ancestors, we'll just call them that because we don't know how far back. I don't remember how many greats there were. And they give him that nice, clean glass of water. It's like, oh, it's fresh, isn't it? It's this brown bleh. They really need a better water source. Doc Brown should have made a filter for them.
Especially for the ice cubes.
Yeah, for the ice cubes at least. Oh, and his lovely, ridiculous costume. that costume he put on. This is what people in the West wear, right? He looked so ridiculous.
Did you like that? You did.
But it did have the atom models on the shoulder yoke.
Joshua, how about you in the third film?
I love the third film. Like everybody said, I think the second one is the one that suffers the most. And so the first and the third ones are by far the better ones. I feel like I feel like the third movie went back to the roots of what the first movie was doing, like what everybody said, where you're all of a sudden getting all of these different connections between everything. Like we find out that Doc Brown is actually building the clock tower that ends up being, so important in the first movie and whatnot. So you're getting a lot of all these like weird little connections, which is one of the things that made the first movie so fun. So you're getting in all of those as well. But I don't think the third movie. Oh, my favorite part of the third movie is the fact that he gets stuck back there and they've got to figure out some way to get the car up to 88 without gas. I mean, they took the time to eliminate other possibilities, right? He's there and Doc's trying to generate and create gas, and all of his experiments, fail, and they blow off the whatever it was, catalytic converter or whatever that was on the car and stuff, because they just don't have the technology at that time to refine and get gas. And so and then they come up with a train, and so from my perspective, the best part of the third movie was this idea of how they're trying to figure out how to get the car up to 88. And they hand wavy it after a while, right? I mean, we don't really know what's in these orange, or not orange, but yellow, red,
pistol logs.
Right?
Yeah.
They throw them in and it blows up and they go faster, right? So we don't really know how they did it. But I mean, you can gloss over that because they're popcorn movies.
That's your problem is we threw in the explosive logs, not we threw in something explosive into the
engine of a train. Yes,
and it blew up.
And it blew up eventually. But I feel like the first movie. I'm going to argue with Barbara on this one. I feel like the first movie is still better than the third. And the reason I think that is because if you think about everything that happens in the first movie, and then you think about everything that happens in the third movie, the first movie was really, really compact and tight, and there was a lot going on. I mean, if you start breaking it down, there were a ton of more scenes in the first movie than there were in the third movie. right? The third movie, basically, he gets there, they try to figure out how they're going to get him back, and then they have the scene where they're getting him back, right? And that's about it. But the first movie, I mean, there were all these different plot lines interweaving, and it was a lot more complicated, I feel, than the third movie. They made the third movie simpler, and I think they made the third movie simpler because of the reaction they got to the second movie, where everybody was saying, it's too complex, I can't follow it. So they dumbed it down a little bit, I think, for that third movie. And they didn't have as much to play with. I mean,
No. I have to disagree a little bit. There's also the entire docs investigating the other great mystery of life. And there's Biff's Griff, Mad Dog Tannen.
Yes.
Out to kill Doc for good reasons. The love affair with Miss Clayton. There's stuff going on in there.
I'm not saying there's not stuff going on in there. I just think that there's more stuff going on, I feel, in the first movie than the third.
I think it's just different stuff.
A lot of it's paralleled, but I get what there's a lot going on in the high school. There's a lot going on with establishing the relationship with his dad and having to date his mom and all that very uncomfortable stuff going on there. And I get what you're saying there. I'm not saying necessarily the third one's the better movie. I'm saying it's my favorite.
Yeah. I feel like the most powerful scene, though, out of all of the movies is probably in the first movie when his father finally, makes the fist and punches out Biff. I mean, out of everything that happened in all of the movies, I feel like that's the strongest character development or character change, and it was kind of the whole point of the first movie, right? His father was a loser at the beginning of the movie, and then because of this one thing, he completely changed and had confidence and whatnot after that. So I don't know. I feel like the whole sequence that was the defining moment or the most powerful moment in terms of character, anyway, for the series.
And yet, when Marty returned to 1985 and things were so much better with the family, they're still living in the same house.
Yeah,
it looked nicer.
They did, but I'm not sure that they would have been in the same house.
I agree with you on that part. I did wonder about the fact that it was the same house. The one thing that
sets are expensive,
right? Joshua mentioned something that made me think this, and this always bothered me, is you had these loser parents at the beginning of the first movie, and then of course they're not loser parents by the end of the first movie, but you had an older brother and sister who were losers, and then you have Marty, who's not, he's a cool kid. And I wondered if that ever bothered anybody, that they had, the two older kids were kind of losers and had nothing going for them, and then they've got Marty, who actually, for the most part, has got a lot going for him in that first movie. Does that bother anybody else? Do you feel like that's kind of a weird family dynamic there, or do you buy it?
Marty didn't have it all together at the beginning of the first movie either, because it was the one audition, they were rejected, and that's it. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm not going to be able to make anything of myself. And it's not until the end of the movie that he realizes, he can be more than just a loser kid.
Yeah, he had no confidence.
Yeah. Just like
again,
I didn't see him as no confidence.
Doc Brown.
Pardon?
He's the nerdy kid hanging out with Doc Brown.
Yeah, but he also had a decent girlfriend, and I saw him in a different, probably floating around in a different clique in his high school than his brother and sister did, and than his father did. We know now that his mother definitely floated around in a different. But I just saw him with a little bit more, less of a loserness about him. Yeah, he wanted to succeed, and they failed in their audition and things along those lines. But I didn't see that as much as a setback as, what was his brother doing, working at
McDonald's or something?
McDonald's, and his sister, I don't remember what she was doing, but then you come back.
She was waiting for a boy to call.
Yeah, and that's right. She's waiting for a boy to call. And then when you come back, he can't keep up with her boyfriends, and the brother's in a suit. And so they the parents obviously shaped how those children's lives became. So how did Marty's life? I don't know. That's my perspective on it anyway.
So,
Okay.
actually, I think the hardest part for me looking at that in the first movie was if the parents became that, would they have still had the same 3 kids?
It's a good point too.
I'd have at least taken one of the kids out just for.
But then the pictures
That would have made it a lot darker,
the
though.
pictures
Yeah,
are fading. You can't do that.
That would destroy Marty's motivation. I mean, most
Yeah.
of his motivation.
I know, but that's the dark side of my humor. Well,
But they had to have 3 kids. Wasn't that the standard back then?
2.5
3 kids?
No, it was 2.5.
2.5, yeah.
2.5
Marty was
kids.
0.5.
I was the 0.5 in my family too. So.
well, as all of us are storytellers and professional liars, in anything like this, it boils down to the characters and the ride that we get to go on. So I'm going to ask the unfair question, just as a round table here. Who's your favorite character? Who wants to take that one first?
Well,
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Doc Brown, hands down. The most humor, the most activity, the most ideas, he did this. The movie really wouldn't have been that movie without Doc Brown. And not only that, but without, what's his name?
Christopher Lloyd.
I could come up with Christopher, but I was coming up with the wrong last name. Christopher Lloyd. Nobody else, I think, could have pulled that part off as well as Christopher Lloyd did. I mean, I remember him back when, what was it? Taxi. He was on
Taxi. Reverend Jim Ignatowski.
Yeah. And remembering what a weird, freaky guy he was, but as he progressed through his career, he played that part so well, and he was just a perfect match to be Doc Brown. And every scene he's in just shines. I mean, you talked about the scene where they're trying to send Marty back and everything goes wrong, and just his whole reactionary acting is incredible, and it makes the movie so much fun.
But I now have a visual of Christopher Walken in that role. So
It gets better when you realize that he was also Commander Kruge in Star Trek 3.
Yeah, it was a Klingon.
I think I've lost track of all his roles. But Doc Brown, I don't know that the movie would have worked as well without Doc Brown.
Oh, no. No. You take Doc Brown out, and I think the whole
thing falls apart.
Yeah, the whole thing collapses. I mean, basically, the third movie is all about Doc Brown. I mean, the goal is to get Marty back to the future, right? But that's the plot. That's not what the movie's really about. The movie's about Doc Brown.
Yeah, he finally finds love.
Yep.
Finally learns to understand it.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't understand it. Why does Clara like him? I don't get it, but okay.
Because
different.
he's smarter than all the dirt farmers living there.
That's
because
it.
he's read
smart.
Jules Verne in the original French.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she likes Jules Verne.
And let's face it, school teachers didn't have a lot to pick from.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I did like their choice in names for the kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was no great
Mhm.
surprise there.
Nope.
So
And-
let me ask. So when we look then at the character of Marty, of course, being iconic, but originally it was cast with Eric Stoltz, right?
Hmm.
For the first couple of rounds, would it have been the same movie without the recast?
Nope.
No, that's the thing with all of these movies. When we look back and you find out that blah 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 was originally supposed to play the role, and they weren't available, and so they got this guy instead, or this woman instead, and whatnot. And like you sit back and you say, I can't even imagine this movie with that person playing the role, because it would not be the same movie.
Right.
I mean, it would be a completely different movie. And I think that with Eric Stoltz in there, it would have been. I don't think he could have pulled off what Michael J. Fox pulled off. Because Michael J. Fox was there and he was confident a little bit, but he wasn't completely confident. And I mean, he had that sort of, I don't know, there was like an innocent naivete to him, but at the same time, you know, he was a little bit more worldly than other people. And he had this weird balance of all of that. And I can't imagine anybody else playing that role and pulling it off like that.
And he looked cute in his little poofy vest.
Did you get off the boat?
The life vest.
Your life preserver.
I didn't understand why he kept putting that on when it was warm out, though.
For the joke.
Yeah. For the one scene, but later on he's still wearing it and he didn't need to be indoors.
I think it was that was cute. Familiar to it. He was taking comfort in his familiar stuff, so he kept all of his familiar stuff with him.
And I do recall kids wearing those just about everywhere.
Oh. I never had one.
I didn't either.
Had one, it was too damn hot. So
I had a coat.
If I'm gonna wear a jacket, I won't wear a jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Ocean Pacific jacket.
So looking at the relationship between Marty and Doc Brown, and looking at that relationship is how it developed. You know, because again, you see Doc Brown, it starts out as the mad scientist, but the mad scientist mentor, right? Accidentally, unintentionally, and in many ways not wanting that role whatsoever. You know, just that manic, I'm going forward and you're going along for the ride. Let's just go. Are there any favorite moments just in that relationship? Because that's the ride we go on for 3 movies, right?
Well, I love the scene when Lorraine follows Marty back to the house in 1955 and the 3 of them in the garage. Because in that scene, Doc and Marty are really good friends and helping each other out, and there's nothing else between them. It's just, oh, wow, yeah, he's helping me here. But the scene that I think we need now is the one that was never filmed, which is, okay, after we've gone through this entire cycle, we understand why Doc and Marty are such good friends at the beginning of the first movie. And Doc knows why at the beginning of the first movie. How does Doc introduce himself to Marty the first time they meet?
I want to know that. How on earth did they meet? And how did Doc get him, this young kid, to hang out with him without sounding like a creepy old man? A crazy creepy old man.
It was the 1980s.
It was the 1980s.
1970s probably, but yeah.
He probably, that it would have been interesting to see that scene, to know how they became friends, or at least have some kind of backstory given to us somewhere along the lines. That's true. But you can assume he knows a lot about him because granted, it's just a few days they spent together, but those were some intense days. So he understands this kid. He probably found some way, I'm just to cross paths with him and say something that he knew Marty would like. And then if he says something Marty likes, then Marty's going to pay a little bit more attention. And next thing you know, he's hanging out with the nerdy science guy and interested in the stuff.
He's got a speaker. Yeah, the amplifier.
He bribed him with the amplifier. All he needed was to say, I have this giant amplifier. And he was hooked.
Maybe he used Einstein to introduce them. Everyone likes dogs, right?
Yeah.
So what about the rumor when it was running around out there of they were going to do what they did to Star Wars, which is bring back a 4, 5, and 6?
Oh God, no. I'm glad I didn't hear that rumor.
I hadn't heard that rumor either.
Oh yeah, they even did test trailers for it for I don't remember who did it. It was definitively never real, or at least as far as we know. But yeah, they were pushing a couple of years ago the idea of a reunion 4, 5, and 6.
No.
Reunion in the future?
Uh-huh.
I don't think they could do that. I mean,
I don't
it's
know.
unfortunate to say, but Christopher Lloyd doesn't look like he can handle much more at this point.
As opposed to Michael J. Fox
And
these
Michael J.
days.
Fox,
Yeah.
neither.
Or Michael
Yeah.
J. Fox.
So we'll come back to the movies in a minute, but what about some of the other properties? So, Joshua, you talked about reading the novelization. There were comics. There was the spinoff cartoon. There were games, all the other stuff. Was there any of that any of you guys got into?
Not massively into. I watched some of the cartoons, but I can't say I like followed it religiously, or whatever. I didn't watch it every single Saturday morning when it was on, or anything like that. Mostly because it was a cartoon. I was like, no, if I went Back to the Future, I want it to be live action movie, or at least live action TV show, not a cartoon. I mean, I know why they did the cartoon, because it's cheaper and easier to pull off all the special effects and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the episodes of the cartoon that I saw, I thought they were fun, but they didn't have the same feel as the three movies. Not even close.
Wait, you mean Rick and Morty, right? No, there was another cartoon.
There was another cartoon where Doc is flying around in the train with his kids, and
I didn't know that one.
Yeah, they have some adventures.
Yeah,
I apparently missed all those. Didn't know they existed.
I didn't
I don't
either.
remember Marty
Till now.
cartoons. I think the cartoons were all I remember from the cartoons is the train and Doc and Clara and the kids. So I think the cartoon, if I remember right, the cartoon was mostly focused on the kids. So the kids were having adventures, and Doc and Clara were just kind of there.
That's why they did it, to try to get a younger generation.
Yeah.
I was in college or grad school by then.
And merch, because they were trying to merchandise it,
Yeah.
because they'd seen Star Wars money by that point.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, I'm a bad fan. I never went in for the ancillary formats of most anything.
Neither do I.
Yeah. I did. I got the DVDs of the movie, which is how I was able to watch the first one a minute ago.
And of course, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the DeLorean.
Yeah.
The car that kept dying.
I mean, the DeLorean was basically a character.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
it was temperamental even in the first movie. It's like, I don't want to start.
Isn't that the definition of a DeLorean?
Well, and I mean, keep in mind, it's a DeLorean that Doc could afford.
Oh, well.
So, who knows what shape it was in when he got it.
Yeah. And originally, in the original script, it wasn't a DeLorean. It was supposed
That's what I was
to be a
going to say.
refrigerator.
A refrigerator?
A refrigerator.
I remembered it was something else, but I couldn't remember what it was.
Oh, well, I'm glad they went with the DeLorean because it looked cool. It looked futuristic.
Yes.
Yes. And it was great when he lands on the farm.
Oh yeah.
And he gets out, and the kid's looking at his comic books, and he's looking at this creature climbing out of this weird vehicle, and it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious.
There's also a scene. It's a throwaway scene. Actually, it's after. I think it's when the DeLorean runs out of gas the first time in 55, and Marty's got to hide it and go walk into town, and he leaves all his stuff on the passenger seat, and just the way he throws it into the seat, it just feels. It's like it's home. It's comfortable. This is his stuff in his car. I don't know. There's something about that scene that catches me. I feel that way sometimes when I'm on long trips in my car because everything is piled on the passenger seat and I know where everything is. It felt comfortable and right. But I think the DeLorean is a gorgeous piece of engineering. I think the biggest problem with the car was John DeLorean himself.
But I mean, they chose the car because of what Barbara said, that it looked futuristic.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
and, with the gull wings and gull doors and everything. And And I mean, your scene that you just pointed out, Ian, is the whole point of that scene was the setup that this is what he has in order to pull off everything he has to pull off.
Yep.
In 55. So, but yeah, it did have that feel to it.
It's a vehicle that at the same time looked very futuristic and yet very 1980s.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything we haven't talked about you guys want to dive into?
Yeah, I wanted to mention briefly. I remember waiting on the subway platform here to go to work just before the third movie came out. At the time, they had posters on the walls, advertising posters, and I remember seeing the poster. It was an old a Western scene with the mesas and whatnot, and two horses. And the next week it was the same poster, but there were two teams of horses. And the next one, I think it was three teams of horses. And then the fourth week was the three teams of horses pulling the DeLorean. No words, just the pictures and the date. And it was a brilliant advertising campaign. And that one stuck with me. Ads don't normally stick with me, but that one did.
I never saw that. But
Yeah.
You didn't ride the subway here.
No.
Anybody else have anything else? Oh, go ahead.
I will share. My kids will talk about, because I actually had children when the first movie came out, and by then I was divorced, so my kids were visiting their dad, and I guess the Goonies came out at about the same time, because he was going to take them to the Goonies, and I don't remember this, but the kids say they ended up seeing Back to the Future because I told him he couldn't take them to the Goonies because too many people told me it was a scary movie.
Okay.
And I had one who could get kind of freaked out at movies that were scary. So they're like, so we didn't get to see the Goonies in the theater. We had to go see Back to the Future.
Oh, gee shucks.
They enjoyed it. I mean, they
Uh-huh.
love the movie as much as I do. But my oldest was telling me that story about a year ago. I didn't remember a thing about it.
when are we doing the Goonies panel?
I'll have to actually see that movie at some point.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
either.
Oh,
I
it's
haven't
good.
either.
although I wonder how dated that one will feel.
And probably a little more dated, but it's still a blast. I mean, I've seen it recently.
There was another point I wanted to make about this one, though. The first time the DeLorean time travels, that 1 minute in the parking lot, when it comes back, the entire outside is covered in ice. Doc says, it's cold, damn cold. And then the next time we see, when Marty lands in 1955, again, we see it sublimating. And that's the last time it ever goes through a trip frozen.
Yeah.
Stargate did the same thing.
They just gave up on it.
Well, it didn't work with the plot. They needed
It
to
was
move it
too
immediately.
hard to do.
Yeah, we can't do it over and over again, I guess.
But it struck me, at least, as, yes, what a brilliant piece of movie making, because if you're traveling through time, there's nothing there. You must be moving at absolute zero. It's going to make the car cold.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I was disappointed that it disappeared.
I thought there was a little frost on it, not nearly as much, but a little frost when he got back to 85. Not as much.
Yes, there was. Yes, in the
Just
first
a
movie.
little bit. In the
It
first
was in the
movie.
first movie only, but when in
Yeah,
the second they
thank you.
fly to 2015, it's flying. There's no ice anywhere to be seen.
Well, then
Maybe
they have
he
the
fixed
fusion
it.
thing.
Yeah, fusion
upgrades
thing.
to the flux capacitor.
There you go.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
fixed that. And the lightning bolt probably melted some of that on the way back to 85.
No, lightning bolt before the absolute zero, but okay.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
I'm sorry. I'm a continuity person.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's why I'm an editor.
That's why I do fantasy, not science fiction.
Still
Well,
need
there's-
continuity.
Yes, yeah. Still need
Yeah,
continuity.
I do. I know.
Sorry, talking over
Time
Josh. I
travel.
think.
Continuity is not necessary according to Marvel.
Don't go there.
All right, last call. Well, in that case, everybody pile in the DeLorean, but before I let you in, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. So, Barbara, websites, social media.
everything should be found under Barbara V. Evers. So sometimes it's Barbara V. Evers author. Sometimes it's just Barbara V. Evers. My website is barbaravevers.com. Come find me.
Amy?
A.L. Kaplan author on everything.com and social media, except one exception, Facebook, because it's weird. It's author A.L. Kaplan. Go figure. Everything else is A.L. Kaplan author. Come visit.
Joshua?
You can find me, Joshua Palmatier, at joshuapalmatier.com for the webpage. And I'm on Facebook under Joshua B. Palmatier. And then on Twitter, I'm at Ben Tate Author. Don't ask. And
But if you go back a few episodes or a few hundred episodes, you can hear part of the story.
Yeah, you can hear why the whole Ben Tate thing happened. But then for the Zombies Need Brains small press, just find zombiesneedbrains.com. We're on Facebook under Zombies Need Brains, and on Twitter it's ZNBLLC. And on Patreon, you can find us both under the same page on Patreon. Just look for Zombies Need Brains and you'll find the page there.
And Ian?
My name is unique on the internet. So Ian Randal Strock, Ian R. Strock, Ian Strock, anything you find, that's me. My website is ianrandalstrock.com, spelled just like that there. The company site is fantasticbooks.biz, not .com, .biz, fantasticbooks.biz, because, well, the .com, they want many, many thousands of dollars for it. And I said, screw that. We can use the .biz. If you're looking in the real world, I'll be at Heliosphere next weekend. I'll be at Balticon the end of May, and Con Carolinas for the first time, the first weekend in June.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com. And that'll just link you to all the other crazy stuff that I'm tied up into. I'm going to save you that rant this time. And other than that, it's time to fire up that flux capacitor, and we'll see all of you again on the other side.